Hello, welcome everyone. I am Josue Meran, and today I have a very special story to share with you. Have you ever stopped to think about the impact that a person's life can have at a turning point? Well, I lived through something that changed everything. My faith, my family, my view of life. In a single moment, everything was questioned. And for you to understand this transformation, I need to go back in time to the year when my life took a different path. I was 65 years old, and the doctors gave me a piece of news that turned everything upside down. A terminal cancer diagnosis, and time as I knew it was running out. But as many of you know, life has a curious way of testing us. I believe that what I lived was a test, and in the middle of this battle I clung to my faith. Every chemotherapy session I went through, I whispered prayers. Every night as I lay in bed, I made a sincere request. If it is my time, let me leave in peace. But what happened, no one could have predicted. It was then, on one of the hardest nights, that something unexpected happened. I was at home, recovering from yet another chemotherapy session, when a strange pain began spreading across my chest. At first, I thought it was just a cramp, but soon it turned into something much more intense. The difficulty breathing was so great that in the blink of an eye, I was in an ambulance with the sound of hurried voices around me, trying to understand what was happening. But I was no longer there, at least not physically. I was seeing everything from above, floating over my body, watching everything in absolute silence. And it was at that moment that the question arose. Am I dying? Is this the end? I saw the medical team, the efforts to save me. But strangely, I felt no fear. Instead, something else took over me, an inexplicable peace. And then I saw a light in the distance, a warm, welcoming light that seemed to be calling me. With my heart beating faster, I moved toward that light, as if guided by a greater force. And what I felt there in those moments was something I could never describe. It was a feeling of total serenity. I felt as if I was surrounded by a divine presence, something that went beyond any human understanding. As I approached that light, I heard familiar sounds, like the humming of a song my mother used to sing to me when I was a child. The gentle voice and the words of faith my father recited during prayers still echoed in my mind. And it was at that moment I realized I was being enveloped by something greater, something my entire life had prepared me to understand. Deep down, I knew I was about to encounter a peace like never before. But then something strange happened. The light I was following, which seemed to be the very door to paradise, began to fade. The trees around me began to wilt, the leaves drying up as if they were dying. The air, which had been fresh and welcoming, was filled with the smell of decomposition. And what I was feeling now was no longer peace, but a deep sense of sadness and desolation. It was then that I heard a deep and firm voice, as if coming from somewhere far away, but at the same time, from within me. Pedro, it is time to reveal the truth to you. I then saw an imposing figure sitting on a throne. It was a familiar presence, but at the same time, something was terribly wrong. This figure, which I recognized immediately, was something like an image I had always associated with the prophet, but something was terribly out of place. He was chained with eyes full of pain and sorrow. I couldn't understand what was happening. How could this be real? Why was he there, imprisoned and in so much pain? I, who had spent my entire life preaching and helping others to keep their faith, was now facing something I never imagined could be possible. As I tried to understand that vision, which seemed more like a nightmare, the voice echoed again in the emptiness. Pedro, it is time for you to understand the truth. And with that, a book appeared before me, falling from the sky with such force that it made the ground tremble. It was a book I recognized, but its presence at that moment seemed more significant than anything else. The Quran, or at least the version I knew, but now, with the pages turning by themselves, something was revealed in a way I had never imagined. The words that were there seemed to question everything I believed to be absolute. Who is the Creator, Pedro? The question hit me like a lightning bolt. I had always accepted the idea of God as something unquestionable, something given. But the voice continued tirelessly. How do you know who the Creator is? Have you ever stopped to ask yourself about that? That question would not leave me in peace. I had always seen God as the creator of everything, the most merciful, but at that moment, I began to question. How did I really know who He was? Images began to emerge, scenes from the past. I saw the Kaaba before Islam, surrounded by idols, by divinities that the Arab people revered. How did this fit into the story I knew? Was God one of these divinities? No, that couldn't be possible. It was like a wave that submerged me, a revelation that left me speechless. Islam, the religion I had dedicated my life to spreading, was built on something far more complex than I had ever imagined. I began to question everything, the origins of faith, the roots of our belief. Those revelations began to stir me deeply. I felt as though my whole life had been built on a fragile foundation. At the same time that I sought answers, I felt an internal force pulling me, reminding me of my duties and responsibilities, both as a man and as a religious leader. I had devoted my life to service, to guiding people. But now my own belief was in crisis. I kept reflecting on those images and voices, asking myself what all of this meant. I was transported to an ancient civilization where I saw a huge idol being worshipped. Written on it, in letters that seemed to be Arabic, was the name Baal, and below another name, El. The deep voice echoed again. Have you ever wondered about the connection between these two names? It was then that the words became unbearable. I fell to my knees, my head heavy with the weight of doubt. Everything I believed to be right started to crumble. I had never asked myself about these things. I had never questioned the origin of what had been passed down through generations. The answer seemed simple, but at the same time, it was so distant. And at that moment, I asked myself, was I deceived? Was my faith not what I thought it was? It was the hardest moment of my life. I wanted to understand, I wanted to find the truth, but that meant questioning everything, even what I had taught for so many years. And while I was lost in this search, I realized that time was running out. I could no longer live in a state of uncertainty. The following days were a true whirlwind inside me. When I woke up in the hospital after everything I had lived, I knew something had changed. Not just physically, but internally. Something in my soul had transformed. I was awake, but the weight of the questions wouldn't leave me in peace. How could I, who had guided so many people, now feel lost? My wife, Maria, was the first to notice my change. She watched me in silence, not understanding what was going on with me, but feeling that something was wrong. She knew I had been diagnosed with cancer, but the disease was not the only battle I was fighting. The real conflict was within me, and I couldn't share it with anyone. I spent hours in my study, surrounded by books, trying to find answers, trying to understand what that other world was trying to tell me. Everything I had believed to be true was being questioned, and it consumed me. During those nights while Maria slept, I wondered if I was doing the right thing. After all, how could I abandon an entire life of faith, a life of devotion, just because something didn't fit? And then, one night, my daughter Anna came into my room and asked, "Dad, are you afraid of losing your faith?" The simplicity of the question hit me like a lightning bolt. How did she, with her innocence, know how to capture what I was feeling? I didn't have an answer. That night, I made a decision. If I truly believed in the truth, then I needed to seek it with all my heart. I could no longer live with the answers I had been given. I needed to go deeper, question, learn, and discover the truth for myself. Time passed, and my questions only grew. I began to study, research, even talk to people of different beliefs. I went beyond the books I had always known by heart. I started to explore stories and teachings from other religions, unafraid to open myself to the new. This search for the truth became my mission, and during this process I realized that the search for answers is not linear. It is not a journey with a clear beginning and end, but a walk full of twists, uncertainties, and discoveries. What surprised me most was how much goodness and wisdom I found in places I never would have imagined looking. In a hospital, I met Sarah, a Christian nurse, who always showed immense kindness when caring for her patients. In a conversation, she told me about the peace she felt when praying, something I had never fully understood, and it was at that moment I realized that a person's faith, regardless of how it manifests, has the power to transform lives. These experiences opened my eyes to the fact that truth does not have one unique form, nor one single path. Truth is something that reveals itself differently to each person, and the most important thing is to be willing to seek it with an open heart. This was the great transformation that happened within me. It doesn't matter what religion, belief, or customs we follow. What matters is what is in our hearts. This change in perspective led me to another level of reflection. I no longer saw others with the same eyes. The differences in beliefs, rituals, practices began to disappear in the face of the understanding that we are all searching for the same thing: truth, peace, the meaning of life. Over time, I began to realize that I was no longer seeking just intellectual answers, but something deeper, something that touched my soul. I was tired of living in doubt. My search for the truth was no longer about finding a logical explanation, but about finding peace. Those sleepless nights, those hours reflecting on my life and my choices, led me to a powerful realization. Peace only comes when you allow yourself to accept that not everything needs to be explained. Faith, after all, is an act of trust. I remembered a phrase I heard from a very wise person: true faith is not blind belief, but a humble acceptance that there is something greater than us. That applied exactly to my situation. It was not about abandoning my faith or the teachings of a lifetime. It was about broadening my view, looking beyond what I had always known. If the truth was in love, kindness, and mercy, then I was ready to accept it wherever it was. And then, in the midst of all this reflection, something surprising happened. During a visit to the hospital, I met João, a priest who was there to pray for a patient. He came up to me, and without knowing everything I was going through, he said, "Peace is not in understanding everything, but in trusting that there is a greater plan." At that moment, something inside me broke. I understood that I didn't need to have all the answers to find peace. Trust was enough. This was the decisive moment. When I got home that night, the feeling I had was one of true liberation. I didn't have all the answers, but I was at peace. And for the first time in a long time, I felt free. In the following days, the change I felt inside me reflected in my daily life. I began to live in a lighter, calmer way. It was no longer about following a religion or a set of dogmas, but about living in harmony with the truth I was discovering. The doubts were still there, but they no longer troubled me as before. I learned to live with them, to accept that the search for truth is a continuous process. It was during this period that my family noticed the great transformation happening. Maria, my wife, who had always been the foundation of our home, saw me in a state of peace that she never imagined was possible for me. It was not a sudden change, but rather something gradual. I was no longer lost, but guided by a new understanding. The people around me began to notice too. The members of our community who once saw me as the imam now saw me as someone simpler, more human. And this brought me a peace I never knew I needed. Truth was no longer something I pursued relentlessly. It became something that lived inside me. I began to talk more openly with my children, especially with Pedro, my oldest son. He always had tough questions I used to ignore, saying, "Faith is about trusting, not questioning." But now I was ready to listen, to really try to understand what he was saying. In our conversations, we learned to grow together, to seek answers not only in words but in actions, in love and in empathy. As time passed, I realized that true transformation was not external, but internal. I was no longer looking for a truth that could be explained in words or books. I had found something much deeper, the truth of inner peace. And it was at that moment I realized that, regardless of the path I chose to follow, the most important thing was the sincerity with which I sought a connection with the divine. And it was with this new understanding that one day, while walking alone in a park near my house, I came across something that seemed like a coincidence, but that I knew wasn't. A man approached me and, without me saying a word, began to talk about faith. He told me about his own spiritual journey, how he too had questioned his religion and searched for answers throughout his life. He told me, "Truth is not in the words we were taught, but in the silence of our hearts. When we find peace within ourselves, truth reveals itself." Those words touched me deeply, and for the first time I felt I was not alone. I had searched so much for external answers, when in reality the truth had always been with me, in the silence of my soul. I didn't need more explanations, because now I knew what it meant to have faith, not in something imposed, but in something that reveals itself every day, in my heart. It was this experience that made me understand that, in seeking peace and truth, we don't need to follow one path. Each of us has our own journey, and what matters is the sincerity with which we walk that path. Truth can manifest in many ways, and now I understand that, regardless of where you come from, what matters is where you are going. Today, I wake up every day with a sense of gratitude I never imagined feeling. The journey I lived wasn't easy, but it brought me the freedom to be who I truly am. I'm no longer an imam, but someone who found peace and truth in a personal and unique way. Cancer, which once seemed like a death sentence to me, became a tool for my inner transformation. I learned that true healing is not physical, but spiritual. The healing that comes when you are able to open yourself to the new, to the questions that were once forbidden, to the answers you never imagined seeking. And more importantly, I learned to love life, to see beauty in every moment, in every breath, in every step. Today, my faith is not defined by a title or a set of beliefs. It is defined by my ability to accept uncertainty, to live in harmony with what is, without the need to have all the answers. I understood that peace is not in understanding everything, but in accepting that there is something greater, something that guides us, even when we cannot see. And it is with this understanding that I go on with my life, every day, with joy and serenity. If you are going through something difficult, if you feel lost or without answers, know that you are not alone. The search for truth is something we all face in one way or another, and true peace comes when we allow ourselves to be honest with ourselves, when we accept that maybe the answer we are looking for has always been inside us. I hope that by hearing my story, you remember that truth is not a destination, but a journey, and it is this journey that sets us free. I want to deeply thank you, who followed this journey until the end. I know that stories like mine can be hard to hear, but they are also stories of overcoming, of transformation, and of faith. I hope that by sharing my experience, you have found something that touches your heart and maybe even inspires you to move forward, even in the most challenging moments. If you like the video, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and activate the bell to follow the upcoming videos. I will continue sharing stories that I hope will make a difference in your life, just as this one did in mine. And finally, I want to leave a message for everyone who is in search of something greater. Truth is not something you find all at once. It reveals itself in unexpected moments, and what you do with it is what really matters. Don't be afraid to question, to search, to transform. The journey is yours, and every step, no matter how difficult it is one step closer to the peace we all seek. Thank you for being here with me. May your journey be illuminated by truth and peace. See you in the next video.